See a few more people who registered who are coming in, so we're just going to hold on a few more minutes.
We still have a few people trickling in.
Just going to wait one more minute. I can see some folks are just trying to get their audio up and running. Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today's Climate Protection Program Covered Fuel Supplier Training. I'm going to ask for our next slide. And we're going to spend most of today kind of walking through some of the additional functionality that's been added to our online system for the Climate Protection Program. So folks are familiar with the term we use here at DEQ, which is the YDO. We'll do a little bit of background on the Climate Protection Program. But just to let folks know, it's not going to be a deep dive since many of you are already actively working in the program. So again, at the end of today's presentation, if you have additional questions, there'll be opportunities for you folks to ask us questions or to set up an individual time with us. Like I said, most of today's program is going to be focused on really walking through the steps for using some of this new functionality in the Your DEQ online program for Climate Protection Program. I did want to take a chance to just kind of introduce or reintroduce the folks here at DEQ who are primarily focused on the Climate Protection Program. I know many of you have been working with some of us, but there's been some changes. So I did want to take this opportunity to once again introduce the staff. So if folks don't know who I am, I'm Nicole Singh. I'm the Senior Climate Policy Advisor. And I've been working on the Climate Protection Program since it was being developed back in 2020. We also have Matt Steele. Matt Steele is our climate policy analyst. Matt did join the Climate Protection Program team from our GHG emissions reporting team. So I know most of you are already familiar with Matt in terms of answering your questions on the Climate Protection Program, but some of you have probably also worked with Matt when he was on our GHG emissions reporting team. We also have Rachel Fernandez. Rachel's our greenhouse gas program analyst. Again, many of you know Rachel from when we were developing the Climate Protection Program way back in 2021. And so Rachel's been on the team for quite some time. Matt and Rachel are really the two folks who are going to be going through most of the slides with you today. They are your primary contacts as covered fuel suppliers in the program. And I know many of you, you hear us respond as the Climate Protection Program team, but it really just the 3-4 of us. So it's basically myself, Matt, and Rachel who you're hearing from, and primarily who you're hearing from is Matt and Rachel. I did also want to introduce Whitney Dorer. This is a new position for us in the climate policy team. Just want to let everyone know that we have a new position on the team, which we call our Climate Policy Community Engagement Coordinator. Whitney primarily focuses and works with us on setting up the CCI program. So we'll talk a little bit more about this in the presentation. But again, the CCIs is the Community Climate Investments, and Whitney has really been brought on to help us on the implementation and help us in getting a CCI third-party entities, kind of making sure that the CCI program is meeting those equity and GHG emission reductions goals that we had set out. So you won't be hearing from Whitney today, but we did want to take this opportunity to introduce her. And I'm going to ask, we also have Jessica Lorenz on the line. Jessica's helping us out. She's the YDO trainer. So her name is not up here, but she's helping us today. And she's a great resource for YDO questions. Next slide, please. So just a couple of things. I know everyone right now, after 2 years of the pandemic, which is now officially over, but we all know how to use Zoom systems. Again, just for participation today, we do ask that if you're going to join by audio, don't also join by computer. We'll ask you to stay on mute when you're not speaking. We do have a Q&A session. So I think when we get to the Q&A session, we'll ask you to raise your hand if you have a question. I just want to remind everyone that the training is being recorded, and we will basically be posting the recording up on the Climate Protection Program website there's a section on the website for covered fuel suppliers, and that's really where all these materials related to the training and using YDO can be found. And if you're having any technical issues with Zoom, go ahead and send a chat to one of us. Next slide, please. I know many of you registered for today's meeting with the Zoom link, but we are going to ask you if you can to, put your name into and add your organization. So on this screen, if you're not familiar with how to do this, you kind of like hover your mouse over, and then you can kind of rename yourself. So you kind of hover your mouse over your participation pane. Then I think you right click on rename, and then you can add your name and your organization. You can also add your pronouns if you like. And then, so this is the welcome introduction at 10 a.m. We're going to do a few slides on the climate protection program. And then really around 10:15, we'll get into the meat of today's presentation, which is walking through the new DEQ online features for the climate protection program. And then, as I said, we'll kind of recap some other resources, and then there'll be a Q&A session at the end. So not that anyone in this training needs to know this, but again, the terms that we use in the climate protection program, we talk about our covered entities. So our covered entities, we kind of break that into two groupings. One is our covered fuel suppliers, which is mostly all you folks on the phone today. And we also have what we call our covered stationary sources. Just to remind folks, we have a best available emissions reduction approach for our covered stationary sources. What we're really focusing on today are the covered fuel suppliers who basically use compliance instruments, what we call the CAP approach. Again, as folks know, we have a CAP and we basically distribute compliance instruments, and you guys all have to use those compliance instruments or those CCIs to show compliance with the program. So our covered fuel suppliers, just again, we sometimes use different terms. So we sometimes use the terms our suppliers of fuels other than natural gas. Sometimes we say non-natural gas fuel suppliers. Sometimes we say propane and liquid fuel suppliers. Again, those are all the covered fuel suppliers who are bringing those fuels into the state. Our other group of covered fuel suppliers, which are basically our natural gas utilities, you'll sometimes see in the rule or sometimes hear folks refer to them as local distribution companies. But again, for our natural gas utilities and for our liquid fuels and propane suppliers, you're all using the CAP portion of the climate protection program. Next slide, please. So again, I won't spend too much time on this. As you all know, basically all our natural gas utilities are covered. The covered emissions are basically anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions from natural gas supplied. All our natural gas utilities are covered under the program. There is no threshold. For our non-natural gas fuel suppliers, there is a threshold. So we talk about the fact that there's a declining threshold over time. So for the first compliance period for 2022, 2023, 2024, that threshold is at 200,000. And then over time, that threshold declines. So for the next compliance period, it moves to 100,000. And then the third compliance movement, it moves to 50,000. And then the last 2031 and later, it moves to 25,000. I'm going to go to the next slide. The important thing to remember is when we determine that threshold, like whether it's at 200,000, we look at both all related entities. And you can see on the screen some different definitions or how you can maybe understand what a related entity is. But essentially, we group all the related entities together. And if that is above 200,000, then every individual related entity is an individual covered fuel supplier under the program. So to be clear, we group everyone to figure out if there's above the threshold, but each individual is actually going to be a covered fuel supplier under the program, and each individual covered fuel supplier will have compliance obligations under the program. So I'm going to turn things over to Rachel. That was just a little bit of a brief overview to kind of resituate folks. Again, if there's questions at the end, obviously feel free to use the Q&A session, and you'll hear from Matt and Rachel and other resources that can be used to answer any questions.
Thank you, Nicole. Yes, thought we would review the timeline for the first compliance period. So Jessica, could you advance the slides a couple times? So just In March of, just to recap, in March of 2022, we distributed the 2022 compliance instruments. And just to give you guys a preview here, that the last day, just to remind you all that the last day that DEQ will distribute 2023 compliance instruments is March 31st of 2023. And similarly with 2024, it would be, the last date would be March 31st, 2024. Could you please advance the slide? Thanks. Again, just a quick reminder about how we did do the distribution for the 2022 compliance instruments. We started with the annual cap, and all of this is informed in Rule 9000 in the tables, but we started with the annual cap as per the rule, set aside the amount for natural gas utilities, also informed by the rule, and set aside the reserve from there, that the maximum reserve size, that's also set in the rule. And then we distributed all the remaining instruments, compliance instruments, proportionally, and determining the averages with the time periods that were stated in the rule as well, in the table 5 of the rule. Could you advance slide, please? Okay. There's a couple of advancements here too, Jessica. I just wanted to give everyone a quick overview of the methodology. Each of the non-natural gas fuel suppliers on this call received a spreadsheet much like this, and just wanted to kind of reiterate with everyone how we actually put these numbers together. And so according to the rule, we took the total compliance instruments, which just mentioned before was 20.4 million. And we multiplied by the covered emissions and biofuel emissions, the average of those, as you can see, and then divided, if you could advance again, thank you, and divided that number by the total for all covered fuel suppliers, total covered and biofuel emissions. And one more time, that number gets you to the number of compliance instruments that your company received. And of course, if you do have questions about that, we can talk about that later in the presentation. So thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Rachel. So now let's jump into some of the new features that we have available in our online, your DEQ online platform. So just to recap a little bit, your DEQ Online, or YDO, is our online permitting and reporting system that we now use across all or most DEQ programs that you'll be interfacing with. And you can access the site and other help resources at the link shown here. Just a quick note that we do recommend using Safari or Google Chrome as browsers, and we have noted some issues using Internet Explorer or Microsoft Edge. So I just wanted to quickly recap a little bit of terminology that we'll be using as we go through today, since it's not necessarily intuitive. Firstly, we'll be using a term called facility. We might also say site. This is just referring to any kind of covered entity. So your company, as you kind of interact with anything to do with the climate protection program in YDO. Next, for the responsible official. A responsible official is someone who has authority within the system to be making submittals on behalf of your facility or your site, to your covered entity. And a submittal is just any kind of form that you're going to be submitting through the system to DEQ. An obligation is a specific type of submittal that is created by DEQ and sent out to you that will appear on your own dashboard. This is a submittal that you must submit to DEQ. So for the CPP, this would include things like permit applications or a demonstration of compliance. New to the system now, with our trading platform, we have two terms: the transferring entity and the acquiring entity. The transferring entity is the covered entity that will be transferring compliance instruments to another entity, and the acquiring entity is the covered entity that will be receiving compliance instruments in a trade. So here's some of the new features we'll be going through today. First, we'll be talking about the compliance instrument trade form. Next, we have a trade form inquiry forum that we'll be going through. Then we have the community climate investment credit application submittal. Next, we'll look at how you can now view all of your compliance instruments and CCI credits from your account. We'll look at how to request compliance instruments from the reserve, if that applies to you. And finally, we'll take a quick look at how we'll have the demonstration of compliance done through the system. So starting now on trading compliance instruments. Just to recap here, we had our first compliance instruments distributed in March of this year. And now here we are in September, and we're excited to launch our trading platforms. The compliance instruments can now be, or trades can now be registered within the system. So just a quick overview of the process for trading. The first step in the process is the transferring entity who will be trading their compliance instruments will start their own trade form. Within that form, you'll select your trading partner who will be the acquiring entity. Once you've completed your portion of the form, that form will move on to the acquiring entity's account, and they will finish that trade form. At that point, the compliance instruments will be instantly traded. There's no DEQ approval for the trading process. Sorry. So to start a trade, you'll see it as one of the possible submittals that you'll see on your dashboard. So you can select it there with the yellow plus button to open the new submittal. Once you open the submittal on your basic tab here, you'll enter the year of compliance instruments to be traded. This might matter if it's, say, 2025 in a compliance year and you want compliance instruments that you can use for that compliance period. You want to make sure that you're getting instruments that are from 2022 to 2024 and not 2025 instruments that won't be able to be used in that compliance year. You'll also enter the amount of instruments and the price per instrument, and the system will then show you the total dollar value for the trade. You'll then need to enter the date of the trade. This will be the actual date of the contractual trade that you've made outside the system, not necessarily the date that you're inputting it into YDO to actually transfer the instruments. And finally, you'll select the acquiring entity that will be receiving the compliance instruments in the trade. And like I said, DEQ has no approval on the trade, so do make sure that you're getting the right entity for the trade, because once you submit this form, they will be able to take those instruments. And then you will need to certify the accuracy of everything you put in the form and select whether you believe that the submittal contains confidential business information. Most of our new CPP submittals will ask you whether the information being submitted is confidential information. So maybe I'll just make a quick note about what that assertion might mean. If you do say that it's confidential information, DEQ will assess whether that information meets our standards of confidential business information at such time as we receive a public records request for that information. So if you assert that it's confidential, that doesn't necessarily mean that that information will never be released, but it does mean that we will assess each and every one of those forms to see whether it meets those standards under Oregon law when we receive a request to release that information. So once you, as the transferring entity, have completed your form, it will move on to the acquiring entity, and it will pop up in their dashboard here as a submittal that they need to continue. So they can, the acquiring entity can then open that submittal from their dashboard, and it will open up for them. The acquiring entity will then see all of the details of the trade that have been input. It will be read-only, of course, but they'll be able to see the price, the amount, the total price of the trade, and they'll just need to sign that form. And then again, the acquiring entity can also assert whether they believe that the information within that form is a trade secret. So next we'll move on to the trade inquiry forum. So to supplement the new trading functionality, DEQ has also added the trade inquiry forum, which will allow entities to advertise any kind of trading that they'd like to do, whether they have excess compliance instruments that they would like to trade to another entity, or if they're seeking compliance instruments that they would like to acquire. And it's important to note that use of the trade inquiry forum is completely voluntary. It's not required for you to engage in any kind of actual trading within the system. You can access the trading inquiry form through the navigation panel shown there. So once you open the panel, you'll see all of the listed trade inquiries here. And to start your own, you can click on the yellow CPP trade inquiry button at the top of the screen. So once you open up a trade inquiry, you'll see all of the required fields filled up there. You'll need to select your own covered entity. If you have multiple entities that you're the responsible official for, those will show up for you in the drop-down menu. You'll need to then, you can keep going, Jessica. You'll need to then show your request type, whether you're looking to acquire or whether you're looking to transfer those compliance instruments. You'll then need to select the desired price per compliance instrument and the quantity that you're looking to either transfer or acquire. You can then select the cap years that you're looking for. Like I mentioned earlier with the trading, this might be relevant if you're looking to acquire or transfer instruments based on a certain compliance period. That'll be important if you're trading instruments that are distributed in a compliance year. Finally, you can set the contact information for the trade. If this is someone different than you that you would like people to contact about trading those instruments, you can change that information here. Once you save the information within the trade form there, you'll see this action panel appear, and you can open that action panel by clicking on it. And that will allow you to publish the trade inquiry onto the forum. You can use this same action panel again once it's published to go in and withdraw your inquiry if you no longer wish it to be posted. So once you posted it, this is what it will look like both on your side here. As you can see, you can have the my side and the published side. My will show all of your trade inquiries, and the published will show all of the trade inquiries from every entity within YDO. You can use that edit button on the right. Sorry, let's go. You can use that edit button on the right if you want to go in and then withdraw it or change any of the details of that trade inquiry. So next we're going to talk about submitting a new application for CCI credits. You'll probably advance through this, Jessica, just to recap where we're at. So to earn CCI credits, covered fuel suppliers will contribute funds to DEQ-approved third-party entities called CCI entities. These CCI entities will then use the funds to implement projects to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Oregon. So covered fuel suppliers are not responsible for any of the project implementation to reduce emissions. They're just responsible for making those contributions to the CCI entities. We'll have the CCI contributions available starting in 2023 once we have CCI entities approved. And the price of these will be an inflation-adjusted price that we'll be announcing in February of each year. You can find the base price of these before inflation adjustments within the rule tables. The price does go up by $1 each year before inflation. CCI credits work a little bit differently than compliance instruments in that they can only be banked for 2 compliance periods. So you can't necessarily use them forever. What that means in practice is if you get a CCI credit that's distributed in 2024, you can then use that for compliance in 2025 or 2028. But after that point, it will be canceled by DEQ. So if you're using these for compliance, you will want to use them as soon as possible. Another note is that CCI credits cannot be traded like the actual compliance instruments. So if you're making those investments, you do need to use the CCI credits yourself. To access the application for CCI credits, you can find that either on your dashboard or in the Start New Submittal module of YDO. And once you open that up, your covered entity and personal information will automatically be filled in for you when you open the submittal. You can change the covered entity if you're the RO for multiple covered entities, of course. You can then enter the name of the CCI entity to whom you have made a contribution, the amount of that contribution, and the date, and based on that information, the system will show you the expected amount of CCI credits that you will receive from DEQ. At the bottom again, you will need to certify that the information contained in the form is accurate, and then select whether you're asserting that the information contained within the submittal is confidential business information. The submittal for CCI credits does require an attachment. This is just the receipt that you receive from the CCI entity to verify that you've made that contribution to them. And after all that, you can submit this, and DEQ will distribute the CCI credits to you. And Rachel, I'll pass it off to you.
Thanks, Matt. So as you start to trade instruments or purchase CCI credits, there is a way within the system to be able to see that. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in the public portal, you would go to your dashboard to view the summary, and you would, excuse me, yes, you would click that the CPP. There's a module in the previous slide. You'll select the CPP compliance instruments and CCI credits module. It will open. Thank you. And it will open, click the pencil icon to open the facility block detail, which is what we basically is a summary view of your compliance instruments as well as your CCI credits. So for the compliance instruments, as you can see here, there's a tab that you would select, and you would have the current available, which is basically the amount that is distributed by the authority and what has been used to demonstrate compliance, which we haven't gotten there yet, but you will be able to see how much we distributed to you. Then when you transfer or acquire, we are able to see that if you retire them or put them in the reserve. So this is a nice snapshot for people. Could you advance to the next slide? And really simply, this is the same idea for the CCI credits. It's the amount that you purchase that we distribute to you. If you use or cancel any after 2 compliance periods, they're no longer, you're no longer able to use them, so that would be canceled. So really simply, just the facility block detail is where you want to go to see a high-level view of both your compliance instruments and your CCI credits. Thank you. And so as Matt mentioned, some of you may request a distribution from the reserve. Thank you. And some examples when non-natural gas fuel suppliers who, and I just want to make sure that this is clear, who did not receive a distribution from DEQ back in February or March, excuse me. But these individuals can request compliance instruments from the reserve. And so a couple of scenarios we've laid out here. If they are a related entity, they become a related entity under the CPP rules. If they exceed the annual threshold under the cap year, or say they have insufficient data to qualify for a compliance instrument distribution, that is 3 years of data. Next slide, please. So if this situation does apply to you, and this is something you need to do, this is how you'll do it. You go to your public portal dashboard, and again, under my submittals, you can also get to it from start new submittal as well, but you'll click this application to open, and you'll select the covered fuel supplier. That would be you and your company. Then you'd identify the calendar year and the reason for the request. If you do, one just note here, you reviewed that we always ask you to review the designated or the RO's contact information. And if it's ever, say you change ROs or something like that, someone leaves, you would need to make sure that this information is correct. And so we can talk about that a little later if that is something that comes up, but that is something that we always want to make sure. And if you do need to refresh it, you can auto populate and it'll take the most current information from your My Public account. Next slide, please. And lastly, we have demonstration of compliance. Thank you. If you could just advance the slide one more time. So the deadline to demonstrate compliance is November 28, 2025. And that is demonstrating the compliance of years 2022, 23, and 24. Next slide, please. There are two ways to demonstrate compliance. You can do one or both. Compliance instruments. Just one thing to note here, and I think we've said this before, but to reiterate, you can use 2022 to 2024 compliance instruments for the 2022-2024 compliance period. So that's to say you cannot use 2025 compliance instruments to demonstrate compliance for the 2022-2024 compliance period. Second way is to choose to use CCI credits. And again, per the rule, we have a limit for each compliance period, maximum allowable amount that you can buy within the compliance period. Next slide. Thank you. So this would be what would happen first is when it comes time, DEQ staff will publish obligations to you, and that's how it will show up as an upcoming obligation on your the public portal dashboard. Advanced slide, please. So once you get that, and the system would send an email, we would communicate all of this. You would open the application and update the contact information if needed. If somebody's changed, you may need to do that. Next slide, please. Click the little plus sign under demonstration of compliance. So you can see above that we have a table with the compliance period, each calendar year of the compliance period, and the covered emissions that have been reported, and then finally your total obligation for the compliance period. And basically, if you could just go back one more, sorry, Jessica. Yes, so you'll see in the drop down, you can see year by year how many instruments you would have to use to demonstrate that compliance. And next slide, please. So you would just choose one of those, and as you can see how it's done here, that you just enter the amount that you need to cover against the available compliance instruments that you have. And then next slide, you would also, if you had any CCI credits to use for the compliance period, so it's not really specific to a year, just a lump sum of CCI credits that you plan to use, you would put in the field below under number of credits to use. And lastly, just one second, thank you. Lastly, the most important thing is, and the system won't let you do this won't let you finish without this, but you just need to make sure that the total that's being demonstrated, and that's both compliance instruments as well as the CCI credits, the sum of that is equal to your compliance obligation. And that does wrap up our YDO new features training. This is a great time to stop and ask if anyone has any questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to put in the chat or raise your hand and someone will get to you. Okay, Abby, thank you.
Hi, good morning. I was wondering, when I saw the compliance obligation table there towards the last of the slides, I was wondering, will that be updated each year as we go so that we can kind of confirm. So when we submit our emissions, it's not always clear what that actual compliance obligation is. Like for us, with Cascade Natural Gas, we have electric generating units that we supply. So that's not really intuitive in what we report to you necessarily. There's not that number of the actual obligation. Plus you have to go through the verification process in August. So just curious, what kind of timing do you anticipate having those available on an annual basis, just to kind of check to make sure that we're looking at the right numbers?
Sure.
I don't know,
Matt,
Matt.
did you, Nicole or Matt, did you want to take this one?
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Unless you want to, Nicole, sure. Hi, Abby. Yeah, so you won't be able to see that through the compliance obligation submittal, because we'll only make this available to you when it's time to actually demonstrate compliance. So you won't be able to see your emissions through this on an annual basis. What we will do once we have finalized emission numbers and we can know what your compliance obligation is from each year, is we'll just reach out to you individually. We'll let you know what we've seen from that year so that you do have that on an annual basis going forward and can plan accordingly.
Great, thank you for confirming that.
I had a question, but I'm going to see if others, and just because I've received this question separately outside of this training. So if you are, because the trading form, Matt and Rachel, it requires that you put a price in. And I know we've talked about this. I have received questions from folks saying, oh, okay, but I don't actually have a price. Or what if I'm moving this to another one of my related entities? So I just, since we're having the training and I've received that question separately, I'm just asking that on behalf of folks who've asked me that question.
Yeah, if you are transferring instruments to another related entity, or you have a trade where it's difficult to put a direct monetary value on that, what we do ask is that just in the attachments, you can add additional details on the trade there, and just note that you're either moving it between other companies that are commonly controlled, and so you're not putting a price on it between those companies, or if other assets are being transferred that it's hard to put a monetary value on. Just give us some idea of that. We just want some idea of that so that when we're tracking trades and average prices on these things, we can know to take out that trading data from those when we're compiling that data.
Okay, thanks, Matt. So folks can always estimate to best of their abilities, and they can kind of note if this is between my related entities, this might be why I have a zero price or something like that. Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions from the audience?
This is Abby again. If you,
Yes.
nobody else has a question. I was just curious if you actually have any CCI entities that you've approved at this point. It sounded like that's still potentially questionable, I guess, as we approach March of 2023. I was just curious.
Abby, you are correct. We don't currently have a CCI entity in place. We are working to have a CCI entity up in 2023, but we are going through those steps right now.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, just to piggyback on that, what is that process to determine what those entities will be?
Yeah, well, we have two steps. One is putting out an application basically for people to apply to be a CCI entity. So this is in the rule. So basically we need to do the solicitation for the CCI third-party entity. Then DEQ, after selecting CCI entities, like it could be more than one. I just want to flag to folks that the selection of the CCI entities is going to be informed by our Equity Advisory Committee. So we're actually going through steps right now to finalize the Equity Advisory Committee. Then essentially once DEQ reviews those applications with the EAC and we essentially pick someone, we then have to do a written agreement, a contractual agreement. And after we finish that contractual agreement, that's really when we approve the CCI entity to receive the funds from you all as covered fuel suppliers. But there are other steps after that on the CCI end. Basically, our CCI third-party entity will be working with us on their work plans. And the work plans are essentially, how they're going to actually be spending those funds and projects around the communities in Oregon. So I don't know, we can go into more detail, but hopefully that's kind of the high level steps that it takes to get a CCI entity up and running so that you guys can, contribute funds to them and receive CCI credits.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Did I miss anything there, Whitney? Just checking. Okay.
Any other questions from the audience? We all are really excited and already in YDO right now, tinkering around. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, then please feel free to interject at any time, but we'll just move forward. Thank you. There are some resources, and if you don't mind clicking through the transitions there, thanks, Jessica. So this is your DEQ online help desk, and it's pretty much everything you need to have, know here, you can find here. So you can find instructions on how to set up an account and the CPP user guide if you are new to the program and you are going to be a RO, you'll need to create a new account. You can log into your DEQ online public portal with your credentials following the link shown there. And finally, where to find FAQs and training materials, both this one and our one from January, can be found at our website, our CPP, our program website, the landing page resources for covered entities. You can find it there. Thank you. And in case your colleagues were unable to attend today, or you want more one-on-one training, you can also reach out to cpp.info at deq.oregon.gov to request a follow-up training or have a conversation with a larger team. And again, if you have any issues with YDO and are having issues connecting to the right people, please feel free to reach out to us. That's all I have. Just pause before we close. This is, did anyone have, I wanted to offer another moment for anybody that had any questions.
Well, thanks, Rachel and Matt. We can see if there's any questions. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this with everyone today.
Of course, yeah. It doesn't look like there's questions. So yeah, if it sounds good to everybody, I think we can close this meeting, and thank you very much for attending today.